The blood-red sunset cast long shadows over the ruined ranch as Amelia Sinclair stared at the smoldering remains of everything she had worked for. The year was 1878, and in the unforgiving territory of New Mexico, she had just lost it all. Her parents' homestead outside White Oaks, the cattle, the crops, even the wedding ring her mother had left her, all gone in a ruthless raid by the men who had been terrorizing the region for months. At 24, Amelia now stood alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination that refused to be extinguished. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her tense. In these parts, visitors rarely brought good news. She reached for the small knife hidden in her boot, the only possession the raiders had overlooked, and waited as a lone rider appeared on the horizon. The stranger rode a magnificent chestnut stallion, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying light. As he drew closer, Amelia could make out the worn leather of his duster and the weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes. A Winchester rifle rested in its scabbard, and twin Colt revolvers hung at his hips. "Evening, madam," he called out, his voice deep and cautious. He pulled his horse to a stop a respectful distance away, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "Looks like trouble found you." Amelia's grip on her knife tightened. "If you're here to pick through what's left, you're wasting your time. The Blackwell gang was thorough." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing the star pinned to his vest. "Name's Xavier Ryder. I've been tracking the Blackwell gang across 3 territories." His eyes, as gray as storm clouds, surveyed the destruction. "I'm sorry I didn't get here sooner." "A lawman," Amelia said bitterly. "You're a bit late, Marshal." "Not a marshal," Xavier corrected. "Just a ranger doing what I can." He took off his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His face was all hard angles, weathered by sun and hardship, but his eyes held something Amelia hadn't seen in a long while: compassion. "They took everything," she said, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. Xavier Ryder looked at the devastated homestead, then back to the proud woman standing amid the ruins of her life. His expression shifted, determination replacing sympathy. "Then I'll give you back more than you lost," he said firmly, "starting with justice." It was a promise as vast as the New Mexico sky, spoken by a stranger who had no obligation to help her. Yet something in his steady gaze made Amelia want to believe him. "Why would you help me?" she asked, suspicious of kindness that came without conditions. "Because no one helped me when the Blackwell gang burned my family's ranch in Texas," he answered simply. "Because they've left too many people with nothing, and it's time someone stopped them." Amelia stared at him for a long moment, weighing her options. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Pride told her to refuse his help. Survival instinct urged her to accept it. "I don't need a savior, Ranger Ryder," she finally said. "I need a partner. If you're going after them, I'm coming with you." Xavier's expression hardened. "It's too dangerous, Miss Sinclair. Amelia Sinclair. And I've already lost everything worth taking. What else can they do to me?" She met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Besides, I know these men. I can identify them. And I'm a better shot than most men in White Oaks." A ghost of a smile crossed Xavier's face. "That's so." "My father didn't raise a helpless daughter," she replied. "He raised a rancher." Xavier considered her words, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "We'll head to White Oaks at first light. You can stay at the boarding house while I gather information." "I told you I'm not staying behind." "And I heard you," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. "But rushing after them half-cocked is a good way to get us both killed. We need supplies, information, and a plan." Amelia wanted to argue but recognized the wisdom in his words. "Fine. White Oaks." But I won't be sitting idle while you do all the work. Wouldn't expect you to, Miss Sinclair. He glanced at the darkening sky. We should make camp for the night. Not much daylight left. As Xavier busied himself gathering wood for a small fire, Amelia watched him with wary curiosity. He moved with the efficient grace of a man accustomed to survival in harsh conditions. His hands were calloused, his movements precise. "How long have you been tracking them?" she asked as he coaxed flames from the kindling. 8 months, he replied without looking up. "They hit my family's ranch near El Paso last summer. My younger brother tried to stop them." His voice remained steady, but Amelia saw his knuckles whiten as he arranged the firewood. He was 17. The unspoken end to that story hung in the air between them. Amelia felt a kinship with this hard-eyed stranger that transcended words. They were both orphans of violence, their lives remade by the same cruel hands. "I'm sorry about your brother," she said softly. Xavier nodded once in acknowledgement. "Tell me about the men who did this," he said, changing the subject. "How many? Any faces you'd recognize?" Amelia closed her eyes, forcing herself to recall details through the fog of terror. 6 men. Their leader has a scar across his right cheek, looks like a knife wound. Another wears a silver snake bolo tie. They knew what they were looking for, went straight for my father's strongbox. "Your father kept valuables here." "Not exactly," Amelia said. "He was the treasurer for the Cattlemen's Association. He was holding funds for the spring cattle drive to Kansas." Xavier's expression sharpened. "That's organized, not just random violence." He paused. "Was your father expecting trouble?" Amelia frowned, thinking back to her father's behavior in the weeks before the attack. He'd been tense lately. "Made me promise that if anything happened to him, I should take a sealed letter to Judge Morris in White Oaks." Her breath caught. "The letter, it was in the strong box." "So they got the money and whatever was in that letter," Xavier mused. "Which means this isn't just about robbery. Your father knew something." The implications settled over Amelia like a cold shroud. "Are you saying my father was targeted specifically, not just because he had the association's money?" Xavier's silence was answer enough. Amelia stared into the growing fire, thoughts churning. 2 months ago, there was a meeting at our ranch. The association members and Judge Morris. They argued about something land rights along the creek, I think. Father was upset after they left. "Land disputes out here often turn deadly," Xavier said. "But the Blackwell gang doesn't usually get involved in local politics. They're hired guns and thieves, not politicians." "Unless someone hired them," Amelia suggested, the pieces beginning to form a disturbing picture. Xavier nodded slowly. "We need to get to White Oaks, talk to Judge Morris. See if he knows what was in that letter." The fire crackled between them as night descended fully. Xavier offered Amelia a portion of his trail rations, jerky and hardtack, which she accepted gratefully. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. "Get some rest," Xavier finally said, spreading his bedroll near the fire. "I'll take first watch." Amelia hesitated. "I don't have a." Without a word, Xavier removed his duster and handed it to her. "It's not much, but it'll keep the chill off." The gesture, simple but thoughtful, caught Amelia off guard. "Thank you," she said, wrapping the coat around her shoulders. It smelled of leather, horse, and gunpowder, oddly comforting in its unfamiliarity. As she settled on the hard ground, exhaustion from the day's trauma washing over her, Amelia watched Xavier through half-closed eyes. He sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his lap, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. In the flickering firelight, she noticed the scar that ran along his jawline and the weight of experience that seemed to press upon his shoulders. "Why a ranger?" she asked suddenly. "After what happened to your family, Why not just hunt them down yourself?" Xavier was quiet for so long that Amelia thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was contemplative. "Vengeance makes a man blind. The law gives purpose to justice." He glanced at her. "My father taught me that before." Amelia nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. Her own thoughts of revenge had been consuming her since the attack, burning away everything else. "We'll find them, Miss Sinclair," Xavier said, reading her thoughts. "And they'll answer for what they've done. I promise you that." As sleep finally claimed her, Amelia clung to that promise like a lifeline in a storm-tossed sea. Morning broke with a clarity that seemed at odds with the chaos of Amelia's life. She awoke to find Xavier already up, brewing coffee over a small fire. "There's a creek about 50 yards east," he said by way of greeting. "Thought you might want to freshen up before we head to town." Amelia appreciated his consideration. After washing her face and hands in the cold stream, she felt marginally more human. She returned to find Xavier saddling his horse. "We'll have to double up until we can get you a mount in White Oaks," he said, tightening the cinch. "Ranger here can handle both of us for the short ride." Amelia approached the chestnut stallion cautiously. "Ranger. You named your horse Ranger." A smile tugged at the corner of Xavier's mouth. Seemed fitting at the time. He helped her mount, then swung up behind her with practiced ease. The closeness was unavoidable but uncomfortable for Amelia, who wasn't accustomed to such proximity with a man she barely knew. Xavier seemed to sense her discomfort, and maintained as respectful a distance as possible while still keeping her secure. The ride to White Oaks took just under 2 hours. As they crested the final ridge, the mining town came into view, a collection of wooden buildings strung along a main street, with scattered homes and tents expanding outward like ripples in a pond. The stamp mill at the western edge of town pounded away, crushing ore from the nearby Homestake mine, while wagons and horsemen moved through the dusty streets. "Busy place," Xavier commented. "Gold brings all types." "It wasn't always like this," Amelia said. "When I was a girl, White Oaks was just a few buildings and a lot of hope. The big strike 5 years ago changed everything." They rode down the main street, drawing curious glances from townspeople. Amelia was painfully aware of her disheveled appearance and the whispers that followed them. White Oaks wasn't so large that the daughter of James Sinclair wouldn't be recognized, even in her current state. Xavier guided Ranger to a hitching post outside the sheriff's office. "Let's start here," he said, dismounting before helping Amelia down. The sheriff's office was a simple wooden structure with barred windows and a small jail cell visible at the back. Sheriff Thomas Wells looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face registering surprise at the sight of Amelia. "Miss Sinclair. Good Lord, girl, what's happened to you?" He stood quickly, concern evident in his voice. "The Sinclair ranch was hit yesterday," Xavier answered, removing his hat. "Blackwell gang from the description." Wells's expression darkened. "And James, Sarah, both gone," Amelia said, her voice steady despite the pain the words brought. "Along with everything else." The sheriff muttered a curse. "Sit down, both of you." He pulled a bottle and glasses from his desk drawer. "This calls for something stronger than coffee." As Wells poured 3 fingers of whiskey for each of them, Xavier introduced himself. "Xavier Ryder. I've been tracking the Blackwell gang across the territories." Wells assessed him with a lawman's practiced eye. "Texas Ranger, heard about you. Thought you worked mostly down El Paso way." "I go where the trail leads," Xavier replied. "And right now it leads here." Amelia sipped the whiskey, letting the burn distract her from her grief. "Sheriff, did my father mention any troubles lately? Threats?" Wells exchanged a glance with Xavier, clearly reluctant to speak openly. James kept his business close, Miss Sinclair, but I know he was worried about something. Asked me to keep an eye on the ranch when I could. Not close enough, Amelia said bitterly. The sheriff had the grace to look ashamed. I was up at the homestake dealing with a claim dispute by the time I heard. He shook his head. I'm sorry, Amelia, truly. We need to speak with Judge Morris, Xavier said, steering the conversation back to their purpose. Miss Sinclair mentioned a letter her father was keeping for him. A shadow crossed Wells's face. That might be difficult. Judge Morris left town 3 days ago, said he had business in Santa Fe. Convenient timing, Xavier remarked. You suggesting the judge had something to do with this? Wells asked, his tone sharpening. I'm not suggesting anything yet, Xavier replied evenly. Just noting that it's an interesting coincidence. The sheriff frowned but didn't argue the point. What do you need from me? Information, Xavier said. The Blackwell gang doesn't usually stay in one area long. They hit and move on. But they've been working this region for months. That means they have a base somewhere nearby. Or protection, Amelia added, the implication clear. Wells bristled. If you're suggesting someone in White Oaks is harboring them, I'm suggesting, Xavier interrupted, that money changes loyalties, Sheriff. And from what I understand, there's a lot of money flowing through White Oaks these days. The sheriff's jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. True enough. The mining companies have brought prosperity and problems in equal measure. He sighed. I'll ask around discreetly, see if anyone's noticed strangers coming and going. Thank you, Amelia said. In the meantime, I need to arrange for my parents' burial and find somewhere to stay. Mrs. Hollister runs the boarding house down the street, Wells offered. Good woman, she'll take care of you, he hesitated. As for your parents, I'm afraid the undertaker's mighty busy these days. Miners have accidents regular like. My parents weren't miners, Amelia said coldly, and they didn't have an accident. They were murdered, and I won't have them waiting in line. Xavier placed a steadying hand on her arm. We'll make arrangements, Miss Sinclair. Your parents deserve proper respect. The simple dignity in his words eased some of Amelia's anger. She nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of her grief and exhaustion. One more thing, Xavier said to Wells. Miss Sinclair needs a horse, something steady but with some spirit. Wells nodded. Jonah's at the livery owes me a favor. I'll see what he can do. They left the sheriff's office with plans to meet again the following morning. Xavier led Amelia to the boarding house, a 2-story structure with white curtains and a small garden struggling to survive in the dusty soil. Mrs. Hollister, a plump woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, took one look at Amelia and clucked her tongue in maternal concern. You poor dear, I heard about the trouble at your ranch. She ushered them inside, fussing over Amelia like a mother hen. Let's get you settled with a hot bath and some clean clothes. I think my niece left some things that might fit you. Xavier remained in the parlor while Mrs. Hollister led Amelia upstairs. I'll secure a room at the hotel, he told her. Rest today. Tomorrow we start making plans. For the first time since the attack, Amelia felt tears threatening. The kindness of strangers after such violence was almost more than she could bear. Thank you, she managed, before following Mrs. Hollister to what would be her temporary sanctuary. The hot bath was a luxury Amelia hadn't expected to enjoy again so soon. As she soaked in the copper tub, letting the warm water soothe her aching muscles, she allowed herself to weep silently for her parents. James and Sarah Sinclair had been good people, hardworking, honest, devoted to each other and to her. They'd built their ranch from nothing, weathering droughts, blizzards, and the constant challenges of frontier life. To have them taken so violently, so senselessly, was a wound that felt impossible to heal. Yet even amid her grief, Amelia found her thoughts returning to Xavier Ryder. The Ranger was an enigma, hard as the land he traversed, yet capable of unexpected gentleness. His promise to help her find justice seemed sincere, but Amelia wasn't naive enough to believe it would be simple or swift. After her bath, dressed in a borrowed blue calico dress that was slightly too large but blissfully clean, Amelia ventured downstairs to find Mrs. Hollister preparing a late breakfast. "Sit, dear," the older woman insisted. "You need food and rest before anything else." Amelia didn't have the energy to argue. She ate the eggs and biscuits mechanically, her mind still churning with questions and plans. Afterward, despite her intention to begin making inquiries in town, exhaustion overcame her. She retreated to her small room and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she awoke, the sun was low in the sky. A soft knock at her door revealed Mrs. Hollister with a tray of stew and corn bread. "Ranger Ryder stopped by earlier," the landlady informed her. "Said to tell you he's making arrangements for tomorrow and will call for you at 8 in the morning." "Did he say what arrangements?" Amelia asked, accepting the tray gratefully. "No, but he left this." Mrs. Hollister handed over a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "Said you might need it." After the landlady left, Amelia unwrapped the package to find a small Derringer pistol and a box of ammunition. A note accompanied it, written in a strong, clear hand. "Miss Sinclair, until we can retrieve your own weapons or purchase replacements, please accept this. It's small enough to be concealed but effective at close range. I hope you won't need it, but these are uncertain times. XR." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched Amelia deeply. Xavier understood that for her, being unarmed was akin to being naked, especially now, with enemies potentially lurking in familiar places. She tucked the Derringer into the pocket of her borrowed dress, comforted by its weight. The following morning, Amelia rose early, washed and dressed in the same borrowed clothes. She braided her long chestnut hair and pinned it up, determined to present a composed face to the world despite her inner turmoil. The Derringer found its place in her pocket once more. Xavier arrived precisely at 8, his tall frame filling the doorway of the boarding house. He'd clearly taken the opportunity to refresh himself as well. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothes clean if worn, his face freshly shaved except for a neatly trimmed mustache. The effect was striking, transforming him from trail-worn ranger to a man of considerable presence. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her, hat in hand. "I hope you rested well." "As well as could be expected," she replied. "Thank you for the gift, it brings me comfort." He nodded, understanding her meaning. "I've made arrangements for your parents," he said gently. "The undertaker will be ready at noon. I took the liberty of speaking with Reverend Parker as well." A lump formed in Amelia's throat. "That was kind of you." "It seemed the least I could do," Xavier said simply. "Before that, however, we have other matters to attend to. Sheriff Wells managed to secure a horse for you, and I've gathered some supplies for our journey." "Our journey?" "Once we've laid your parents to rest," Xavier explained. "We'll need to follow the Blackwell gang's trail while it's still fresh. Unless you've changed your mind about coming along." "I haven't," Amelia assured him firmly. "Though I'm surprised you haven't tried to talk me out of it again." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I recognize determination when I see it, Miss Sinclair. Besides, you know the land and the people hereabouts better than I do. Your knowledge may prove invaluable." They walked to the livery stable where Sheriff Wells waited with a sturdy buckskin mare. "Morning, Miss Sinclair, Ranger." He nodded to them both. "This is Penny. She's steady in a pinch but has enough fire to keep up when needed." Amelia approached the mare, letting the horse sniff her hand before stroking its neck. "She's lovely. Thank you, Sheriff." "Don't thank me yet," Wells said grimly. "I've been asking around town, quiet-like. Seems there have been strangers coming through regularly. Always the same men, never staying long. They meet at the Silver Dollar Saloon with Marcus Fletcher." Xavier's expression hardened. "Fletcher?" "The mining company agent." "The same," Wells confirmed. "He represents Eastern investors in several claims around White Oaks, throws a lot of money around." "And what business would a mining agent have with outlaws?" Xavier mused. "That's what I aim to find out," Wells replied. "Fletcher's hosting some kind of gathering at his house tonight. Society folks and business types." He glanced at Amelia. "Your father was invited before." "Well, then I should attend in his place," Amelia said immediately. Both men looked at her in surprise. "It makes sense," she insisted. "No one would question James Sinclair's daughter appearing on his behalf. I could observe Fletcher, perhaps overhear something useful." "It's too dangerous," Xavier objected. "Not if I'm simply a grieving daughter making a public appearance before retreating to mourn in private," Amelia countered. "Besides, Fletcher won't suspect me of anything. Women are invisible to men like him, useful for decorating a room but not worth taking seriously." Xavier seemed about to argue further, but Sheriff Wells intervened. "She has a point, Ranger. Fletcher wouldn't give her a second thought. And having eyes and ears at that gathering could be valuable." Xavier studied Amelia for a long moment, his gray eyes assessing her resolve. "You'd need appropriate attire, and you couldn't go alone." "Mrs. Hollister might have something suitable," Amelia said. "And I wouldn't be alone if you accompanied me. A Texas Ranger at a society gathering. I'd stick out like a wolf in a henhouse." "Not if you clean up and pose as a potential investor," Sheriff Wells suggested. "Fletcher's always looking to impress men with money." Xavier's expression suggested he'd rather face the Blackwell gang single-handed, but he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But at the first sign of trouble we leave." "Agreed, agreed," Amelia said, feeling a spark of satisfaction at having won the point. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of preparations. Xavier acquired appropriate evening attire with the sheriff's help, while Amelia returned to the boarding house to speak with Mrs. Hollister about a suitable dress. The kindly landlady, delighted to assist, produced a deep green silk gown that had belonged to her daughter before she moved east. "It might need taking in at the waist," Mrs. Hollister said, holding the dress against Amelia. "But the color will complement your eyes beautifully." By noon, Amelia had set aside thoughts of the evening's mission. Dressed in black, borrowed mourning clothes, she met Xavier outside the small church where Reverend Parker waited to conduct the funeral service. Only a handful of people attended, neighbors and friends who had heard the news in time. Amelia stood dry-eyed beside the simple pine coffins, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. Xavier remained at her side throughout, a silent pillar of strength. When the service concluded and the coffins were lowered into the rocky soil of the White Oaks Cemetery, he placed a steadying hand on her elbow. "Your parents would be proud of your courage," he said softly. "I don't feel courageous," Amelia admitted. "I feel hollow." "That's natural," Xavier assured her. "The emptiness will fill with purpose in time." She glanced at him, wondering how long it had taken for his own grief to transform into the driven purpose that now defined him. "Does it get easier?" "Living with the knowledge that the people who took your family are still out there, unpunished?" "No," he answered honestly. "But it gives clarity to your actions. Every step I take is in service of justice for my brother, for others who have suffered. And now for your parents." His words resonated with Amelia's own feelings. The emptiness inside her was slowly being filled with determination, a need to see the men who destroyed her family answer for their crimes. After the funeral, they returned to the boarding house to prepare for the evening. Mrs. Hollister helped Amelia with the green silk dress, which fit surprisingly well after some hasty alterations. The landlady also arranged Amelia's hair in an elegant style more suited to an evening gathering than a frontier town. "You look lovely, dear, Mrs." Hollister said, stepping back to admire her work. "Your mother would be so proud." The mention of her mother brought a fresh wave of grief, but Amelia pushed it aside. Tonight wasn't about mourning, it was about finding answers. She carefully tucked the derringer into a small pocket hidden in the folds of her skirt, ready if needed. Xavier was waiting in the parlor, and Amelia nearly didn't recognize him. Gone was the trail-worn Ranger, replaced by a gentleman in a well-fitted dark suit. His hair was neatly combed, his mustache trimmed. Only his eyes remained unchanged, alert, observant, and containing the same steel that had drawn her to trust him from the beginning. He stared at her for a moment longer than was proper, clearly taken aback by her transformation as well. "Miss Sinclair," he finally said, offering his arm. "You look remarkable." "As do you, Mr. Ryder," she replied, accepting his arm. The formality between them felt strange after the intimacy of shared grief and danger, but it was necessary for the role they would play tonight. "Remember," Xavier said as they walked toward Fletcher's mansion at the edge of town, "we're gathering information only. Listen, observe, but don't draw attention to yourself." "I know," Amelia assured him, "though I doubt Mr. Fletcher will pay me much mind. He's always been more interested in my father's connections than in acknowledging his family." "Then let him underestimate you," Xavier said with a slight smile. "It may work to our advantage." Fletcher's home was ostentatious by White Oak standards, a large two-story structure with imported furniture and pretensions of Eastern sophistication. Lamps blazed in every window, and the sound of a piano drifted into the cool night air. A servant took their wraps at the door, and they were announced to the gathering. Miss Amelia Sinclair and Mr. Xavier Richardson. Xavier had adopted a false surname for the evening, presenting himself as a Boston investor interested in New Mexico mining opportunities. The slight change preserved his initials while providing a cover that would stand up to casual scrutiny. Marcus Fletcher himself came to greet them, a tall, florid man with expensive tastes and a patronizing smile. "Miss Sinclair, I hadn't expected you this evening, given your recent tragic loss." His tone suggested he found her presence inconvenient rather than surprising. "I felt it important to honor my father's commitments," Amelia replied smoothly. "He always spoke highly of your business acumen, Mr. Fletcher. May I present Mr. Richardson of Boston? He's considering investments in the region." Fletcher's attention immediately shifted to Xavier, his interest piqued by the prospect of Eastern capital. "Indeed. Welcome to White Oaks, Mr. Richardson. You've chosen an opportune time to consider our little boomtown." As Fletcher launched into an enthusiastic description of the area's mining potential, Amelia took the opportunity to observe the gathering. About 30 people filled the large parlor, mining executives, merchants, a few ranchers and their wives. In the corner, a group of men huddled in conversation, their expressions serious despite the festive atmosphere. One man in particular caught her attention, tall, with a neat beard and an air of authority. What drew her eye, however, was the distinctive silver snake bolo tie at his throat. Her heart raced as she recognized it as matching her description of one of the raiders. Xavier, still engaged in conversation with Fletcher but aware of her every move, noticed her sudden tension. With a subtle shift, he maneuvered their host so that Amelia could better see the group without being obvious. "You mentioned new claims opening to the north," Xavier said to Fletcher. "I'd be interested in hearing more about the potential yields." As Fletcher expounded on ore quality and extraction methods, Amelia circulated slowly through the room, exchanging polite greetings with acquaintances while working her way closer to the group that included the man with the snake tie. She paused near enough to overhear their conversation while pretending to examine a painting on the wall. "The judge won't be a problem," the snake tie man was saying. "He knows which side his bread is buttered on." "It's not Morris I'm worried about," another man replied. "It's that Ranger asking questions around town. Wells should have run him off." "Wells is manageable," a third voice contributed. "It's the Sinclair girl we need to deal with now. Without the letter, she's the only one who might connect the pieces." Amelia's blood ran cold. They were talking about her, and clearly, they had no idea she was standing mere feet away. "Fletcher says she's here tonight," the snake tie man said, his voice dropping further. "Convenient. We can take care of it on her way home, make it look like grief drove her to desperate measures." Fighting to keep her expression neutral, Amelia moved away casually, her mind racing. They were planning to kill her tonight, and they had mentioned her father's letter, confirming it was significant enough to murder for. She made her way back to Xavier, who was still engaged with Fletcher but watching her approach. With practiced social grace, she inserted herself into their conversation. "Mr. Fletcher, your home is lovely. Would it be possible to get a breath of fresh air? The room is rather warm." "Of course, my dear," Fletcher replied, gesturing to a set of doors. "The veranda is through there." "Perhaps Mr. Richardson would accompany me," she suggested, giving Xavier a meaningful look. "I'd be delighted," Xavier responded, excusing himself from Fletcher with promises to continue their discussion later. Once outside in the relative privacy of the veranda, Amelia kept her voice low and her expression pleasant, as if they were merely enjoying the night air. "The man with the silver snake bolo tie is one of the raiders," she whispered. "They're planning to kill me tonight on my way home. They mentioned my father's letter. They know I might connect the pieces, whatever that means." Xavier's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "Did they say anything else?" "They mentioned Judge Morris. Said he knows which side his bread is buttered on, and they seemed confident they could manage Sheriff Wells." She took a deep breath. "Xavier, I think this conspiracy goes beyond the Blackwell gang. These men are respectable citizens of White Oaks. Respectability often masks the worst corruption," Xavier said grimly. "We need to leave, but not obviously, and not by any route they might expect." "There's a service entrance at the back of the house," Amelia suggested. "The kitchen staff use it." Xavier nodded. "Good. We'll slip out that way in a few minutes. First, I want to get a better look at our friend with the bolo tie." They returned inside, where Xavier maneuvered them through the crowd until he had a clear view of the man Amelia had identified. His expression remained impassive, but Amelia felt him tense beside her. "Harold Vance," he murmured. "Mining engineer. Supposedly legitimate, but I've heard rumors he provides technical expertise for claim-jumping operations." "He was there when my parents were killed," Amelia said with certainty. "I'd swear to it." "I believe you," Xavier assured her. "And now we know they're planning to silence you tonight. But why? What could be in that letter that's worth killing for?" Before Amelia could respond, Fletcher approached them again, his manner even more effusive than before. "Mr. Richardson, there are some gentlemen I'd like you to meet, potential partners perhaps for your investment interests." Xavier recognized the trap immediately. Fletcher was trying to separate them, isolating Amelia for his confederates. "I'd be delighted," he said smoothly. "But I insist Miss Sinclair join us. Her father's knowledge of local conditions would be invaluable to any discussion of regional investments." Fletcher's smile tightened. "Of course, though I wonder if Miss Sinclair might not prefer some lighter company after her recent ordeal." Mrs. Fletcher would be happy to introduce her to some of the ladies. I assure you, Mr. Fletcher, I find business discussions far more diverting than gossip, Amelia replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father ensured I understood the economic foundations of our region. Outmaneuvered, Fletcher had no choice but to lead them both to the group that included Harold Vance. As introductions were made, Amelia maintained her composure, even when shaking the hand of the man she was certain had participated in her parents' murder. Vance showed no sign of recognizing her, treating her with the same dismissive courtesy that most men of his position reserved for women. His attention focused on Xavier, whom he clearly perceived as the more significant threat. Boston, you say? Vance inquired, studying Xavier with calculating eyes. I was just in Boston last fall. Which neighborhood do you call home? It was a test, and both Amelia and Xavier knew it. A genuine Bostonian would easily name his district and street, perhaps mention well-known landmarks or establishments. Xavier didn't hesitate. Beacon Hill, though I spend much of my time traveling. My investments require personal attention, and I find New England winters increasingly intolerable as I age. He smiled disarmingly. You know how damp cold settles in the bones. Vance seemed to accept this explanation, but Amelia noted the suspicion lingering in his eyes. They needed to leave, and soon. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier checked his pocket watch. I fear we must make our excuses, gentlemen. Miss Sinclair has had a trying day, and I promised her guardian I would see her safely home at a reasonable hour. Guardian? Fletcher inquired, puzzled. Sheriff Wells has kindly taken an interest in my welfare, given my circumstances, Amelia improvised smoothly. He's expecting us to check in with him this evening. The mention of Wells watching for their return was a calculated risk, but it paid off. Vance and Fletcher exchanged glances, clearly reconsidering their immediate plans. Of course, Fletcher said, his false joviality restored. Do give the sheriff my regards. They made their goodbyes to their host and hostess, then retrieved their wraps from the servant. Instead of exiting through the front door, however, Xavier guided Amelia toward a side corridor. The service entrance, he murmured. She nodded, leading him through the house until they reached the kitchen, where surprised staff watched them pass through to the rear door. Outside, darkness provided welcome cover as they hurried away from the mansion, taking a circuitous route back toward town. They'll realize we didn't return to the boarding house and come looking for us, Xavier said as they hurried through the shadows. We need somewhere safe to go while we plan our next move. The church, Amelia suggested. Reverend Parker keeps a small room in the back for travelers in need. He'd help us without asking too many questions. Xavier considered this, then nodded. It'll do for tonight. Tomorrow we'll need to leave White Oaks. It's not safe for you here anymore. But what about Sheriff Wells? If what we overheard is true, he might be in danger too. We'll warn him, but discreetly, Xavier decided. If Fletcher and Vance have as much influence as it seems, Wells might be compromised whether he knows it or not. They reached the small church without incident. Reverend Parker, despite the late hour, welcomed them with concern when he saw their formal attire and urgent expressions. Trouble? He asked simply. The kind that requires discretion, Xavier confirmed. The Reverend nodded. The traveler's room is yours. There's a lock on the door, and I'm a light sleeper. He smiled grimly. The Lord's work sometimes requires vigilance, especially in places like White Oaks. The room was small but clean, with a narrow cot, a chair, and a washstand. Amelia sank onto the chair, suddenly exhausted by the tension and fear of the evening. What now? She asked as Xavier checked the room's single window, ensuring it was secure. Now we try to understand what we're dealing with, he said, sitting on the edge of the cot. Your father's letter clearly contained information that threatens Fletcher and his associates, information worth killing for. Land rights, Amelia said suddenly, remembering. That argument I mentioned, it was about land along Baxter Creek. The water rights are crucial for both ranching and mining operations. Xavier's expression sharpened with interest. Water rights in this territory are as good as gold, better sometimes. Father said the creek runs through land that was granted to several Hispanic families generations ago by the Spanish crown. But when American law came to the territory, those grants weren't always recognized. Let me guess, Fletcher and his mining interests want that water for their operations. Amelia nodded. And they'd need the Cattlemen's Association to agree, since the ranchers also depend on that water. As treasurer, my father had influence. Influence he apparently wasn't willing to use the way Fletcher wanted, Xavier concluded. So they sent the Blackwell gang to eliminate the problem and steal whatever evidence your father had collected. But why involve Judge Morris? Amelia wondered. What role does he play in all this? Judges rule on land disputes, Xavier pointed out. If Morris is corrupt, he could ensure any legal challenges to Fletcher's claims were decided in the mining interests' favor. The pieces were beginning to fit together, forming a picture of corruption and greed that had led to violence. Yet something still nagged at Amelia's mind, a detail that didn't quite align. Wait, she said. If Fletcher simply wanted the letter, why kill my parents? Why not just steal it? And why come after me now? Xavier considered this. Good questions. It suggests the letter isn't the only evidence. Your father might have shared his suspicions with you or left other documentation somewhere. If he did, I don't know about it, Amelia said, frustration evident in her voice. He never discussed business matters with me in detail. Are you certain? Xavier pressed gently. Think carefully. Any unusual conversations in the weeks before the attack? Places he might have hidden documents? Amelia closed her eyes, trying to recall her father's behavior. He was worried, I know that, kept checking the strongbox, which wasn't like him. She paused, a memory surfacing. And he took me to the old line shack near Baxter Creek about a month ago. Said he wanted to show me something important about property boundaries. What did he show you? That's just it, nothing specific. We rode the property line and he pointed out some survey markers. Said it was important I understand exactly where our land ended and the neighboring grant began. She frowned, concentrating. He did spend some time at one particular marker, a pile of stones near a lightning-struck pine, dismounted and checked something, though I couldn't see what. Xavier leaned forward, intent. Could you find that spot again? I think so, yes. Then that's where we go tomorrow, he decided. First light, we'll warn Sheriff Wells, then ride for the line shack. The plan made, they turned to the awkward matter of sleeping arrangements. The room had only the single cot, barely wide enough for one person. You take the bed, Xavier said immediately. I'll keep watch from the chair. You can't stay awake all night, Amelia protested. Not after the day we've had. I've gone longer without sleep, he assured her. Rest, Miss Sinclair. Tomorrow will demand all your strength. Amelia wanted to argue further but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Instead, she removed her shoes and lay down on the cot, still in her borrowed finery. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the events at Fletcher's mansion, replaying the overheard conversation and the chilling realization that her life was in danger. Xavier, she said softly into the darkness. Yes, thank you for believing me, for helping me. There was a pause before he replied. You don't need to thank me for doing what's right, Miss Sinclair. Amelia, she corrected him. After everything we've been through, I think formality seems rather pointless, don't you? Another pause, longer this time. Amelia, he finally agreed, her name spoken with careful precision. Try to sleep now. Despite her racing thoughts, Amelia eventually drifted into uneasy slumber. She dreamed of her parents, of the ranch in flames, of men with silver snake ties closing in around her. In her dreams, Xavier was always just out of reach, his hand extended toward her but never quite connecting. She awoke before dawn to find Xavier still alert in the chair, his eyes fixed on the door. He acknowledged her with a slight nod. "No disturbances," he reported. "Reverend Parker brought fresh clothes for you about an hour ago, left them outside the door." Amelia sat up, noting the simple riding skirt and blouse folded neatly on the washstand. "You should have woken me. You needed the rest," he said simply, rising to stretch his tall frame. "I'll step outside while you change. Then we'll find Wells." The morning air was crisp as they left the church, thanking Reverend Parker for his discretion and hospitality. The town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their establishments, miners heading to their shifts. They found Sheriff Wells at his office, already at his desk, despite the early hour. His expression turned grave as they related the events of the previous night. "I suspected Fletcher wasn't entirely clean," Wells admitted, "but this goes beyond anything I imagined. Judge Morris, Harold Vance, these are respected men in White Oaks." "Respect can be purchased like anything else," Xavier said. "The question is, will you stand with us or with them?" Wells bristled at the implication. "I've worn this star for 15 years, Ranger. Never once compromised what it stands for." "I'm glad to hear it," Xavier replied, "because we're going to need your help. We believe James Sinclair may have hidden evidence near a boundary marker on his property. Amelia and I are riding out to search for it, but Fletcher and his men will be looking for us." "You need a diversion," Wells surmised. "And protection afterward," Amelia added. "If we find what we think is there, we'll need a lawman we can trust to help us act on it." Wells considered this, then nodded decisively. "I'll spread word that you were seen heading south toward Lincoln. That should buy you some time." He opened a drawer and removed a folded document. "And take this, it's a federal writ I've been holding for a mail fraud case. Gives me authority to request assistance from any law enforcement officer in the territory." Xavier accepted the document with a nod of thanks. "We'll be back by nightfall if all goes well. If we're not, then I'll come looking," Wells promised. They left through the back door of the sheriff's office, making their way to the livery where their horses waited. Penny greeted Amelia with a soft nickering, while Ranger stood alert, sensing his rider's tension. As they mounted up, Xavier checked his weapons one final time, the Winchester in its scabbard, the Colts at his hips, a knife in his boot. Amelia had her derringer and a rifle borrowed from Wells's office. "Ready?" Xavier asked, his eyes meeting hers. Amelia nodded, a strange calm settling over her. For days she had been reacting to events beyond her control, buffeted by loss and fear. Now, finally, she was taking action. "Let's find the truth," she said. They rode out of White Oaks as the sun crested the eastern mountains, keeping to less traveled trails and watching carefully for pursuit. The journey to the Sinclair ranch would take several hours, giving them time to plan their search and consider their next moves. "Tell me more about this boundary marker," Xavier said as they rode side by side across the open range. "It's where our property meets land that was part of the San Miguel Grant," Amelia explained. "The grant dates back to 1794, when the Spanish crown awarded it to the Domings family. Their descendants still live in the area, working small farms and ranches. And the mining companies want this land. Parts of it, yes, particularly the water rights. Baxter Creek is one of the few year-round water sources in the region." Father always said that in New Mexico, water is more precious than gold. Xavier nodded in understanding. In Texas, men have been killed for less, but this scheme seems particularly elaborate. Fletcher must have powerful backers. The Eastern Mining Consortium, Amelia suggested. They've invested thousands in the White Oaks mines. If their operations are threatened by water shortages, they might resort to extreme measures, including murder and hiring outlaws, Xavier agreed grimly. The question is, what did your father discover that made him such a threat? They rode in thoughtful silence for a time, each considering the possibilities. The landscape around them was quintessential New Mexico, vast open spaces, punctuated by mesas and distant mountains, the earth painted in shades of brown and red and gold. Despite the beauty, Amelia couldn't help scanning the horizon regularly, alert for any sign of pursuit. As they approached the burned-out remains of the Sinclair ranch house, Amelia's throat tightened with emotion. In the harsh light of day, the destruction seemed even more complete than it had that first terrible evening. The charred timbers of the house stood like blackened bones against the sky, while scattered debris marked where outbuildings had once stood. "We should keep moving," Xavier said gently, noting her distress. "The line shack is still a ways, right?" Amelia nodded, forcing herself to look away from the ruins of her childhood home. "About an hour's ride to the northwest, following Baxter Creek." They skirted the ranch house and rode toward the creek, a ribbon of green life cutting through the arid landscape. The water reflected the blue sky above, sparkling in the mid-morning sun. "I can see why this water is worth fighting over," Xavier commented as they followed the creek's winding course. "In a drought year, it could mean the difference between survival and ruin for the ranchers. And for the miners, it's essential for their operations," Amelia added. "They use water in almost every step of processing ore." Eventually, they spotted the line shack, a simple one-room structure built decades earlier to shelter cowboys working the range during roundups and branding. It stood near a bend in the creek, weathered but solid. "The boundary marker is about a quarter-mile beyond the shack," Amelia said, pointing to a distant hillock where a lone pine stood, its top shattered by lightning. "Near that dead tree." They approached cautiously, alert for any sign that others might have been there recently. The shack appeared undisturbed, its door still secured with the simple wooden latch. Inside, dust covered the few pieces of furniture: a rough table, 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and a small cast-iron stove. "No one's been here for a while," Xavier observed, running a finger through the dust on the table. "Not since Father and I visited last month," Amelia confirmed. They left their horses ground tied near the shack and proceeded on foot to the boundary marker. As they drew closer, Amelia pointed to a pile of stones arranged in a rough cairn. "That's it. That's where Father stopped and checked something." Xavier knelt beside the cairn, examining it carefully. "These stones have been disturbed recently," he noted. "See how the soil is fresher underneath these two?" He began removing stones methodically, setting them aside until he reached the base of the cairn. Beneath the final layer of rocks, a small metal box was revealed, the kind used to store tobacco, with a tight-fitting lid. "This what your father was checking?" Xavier asked, lifting the box carefully. "I think so," Amelia replied, excitement building. "I couldn't see clearly from where I was standing, but he definitely handled something at the base of the marker." Xavier handed her the box. "Your father's secret. You should open it." With slightly trembling hands, Amelia pried open the lid. Inside lay several folded documents, along with a small notebook. She removed them carefully, unfolding the first document, a land deed dated 1867, signed by officials of the New Mexico Territory, recognizing the boundaries of the San Miguel Grant. "This confirms the Domings family's claim," she said, scanning the document. "But why would Father hide it here?" The second paper was more revealing, a letter from Judge Morris to Marcus Fletcher, dated just 2 months earlier. Amelia read it aloud. "Fletcher, the documents you seek cannot be legally challenged without creating unwanted attention. Sinclair has copies of the original grant boundaries and has been gathering testimonies from the Domings heirs. More concerning, he has obtained proof of the payments made to discount the grant claims in '72. If this becomes public, our arrangement will collapse, along with your Eastern funding. I suggest a more permanent solution to the problem." Morris Xavier's expression darkened. "That's as good as a confession. Morris was suggesting they eliminate your father to prevent him from exposing their corruption." "And this must be what Father collected," Amelia said, opening the notebook. Inside were meticulous notes detailing meetings, conversations, and observations, all pointing to a conspiracy between Judge Morris, Marcus Fletcher, and others to fraudulently invalidate the San Miguel Grant claims in order to secure water rights for the mining operations. "Your father was building a case," Xavier said, admiration in his voice, "gathering evidence to expose corruption at the highest levels of White Oak society." "And they killed him for it," Amelia whispered, grief and anger mingling in her heart. Before Xavier could respond, the crack of a rifle shot split the air. The bullet struck the ground inches from where they knelt, sending dirt and stone fragments flying. "Down!" Xavier shouted, pulling Amelia behind the shelter of the cairn as a second shot rang out. "Where are they?" Amelia gasped, clutching the metal box and its precious contents. Xavier peered cautiously over the rocks. "Ridge to the west. I count 3 riders, no 4. His expression turned grim. "One of them is wearing a silver bolo tie." "Vance," Amelia hissed, "how did they find us?" "Someone must have spotted us leaving town, despite Wells's diversion." Xavier drew one of his Colts. "We need to reach the horses." Another shot struck the cairn, sending stone fragments flying. They were pinned down with little cover between their position and the lined shack where their horses waited. "I'll draw their fire," Xavier decided. "When I do, you run for the shack. Don't stop, don't look back." "I'm not leaving you here," Amelia protested. "This isn't a debate," Xavier snapped. "Those documents are the only proof of what happened to your parents. They need to reach Sheriff Wells with or without us." Before she could argue further, Xavier fired 3 rapid shots toward the ridge, then bolted in the opposite direction from the shack, drawing the attacker's attention. Bullets kicked up dirt around him as he zigzagged across the open ground. Amelia hesitated only a moment before seizing her opportunity. Clutching the metal box, she ran toward the lined shack, keeping low. Behind her, the gunfire intensified as Xavier returned fire from behind a boulder. She reached the shack and ducked inside, heart pounding. Through the small window, she could see Xavier pinned down, exchanging shots with the men on the ridge. They had split up, 2 working their way down to flank his position while the others kept him occupied. Amelia knew she should take the evidence and ride for White Oaks, as Xavier clearly intended. It was the logical choice, the one that would ensure their discoveries weren't lost. But logic warred with another, more powerful imperative. She would not abandon the man who had risked everything to help her. With swift decision, she tucked the metal box securely in her saddlebag, then grabbed the rifle she'd borrowed from Wells. It was a Winchester model similar to Xavier's, and while she wasn't an expert marksman, growing up on a ranch had taught her to shoot accurately enough. Taking position at the window, she sighted on one of the men attempting to flank Xavier. She drew a deep breath, steadied her aim, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and the man on the ridge jerked backward, dropping his weapon. The unexpected fire from a new direction created momentary confusion among the attackers. Xavier seized the opportunity to make a dash toward the shack, firing as he ran. Bullets kicked up dirt around him, but he kept moving, his long legs eating up the distance. Amelia fired again, forcing the remaining men to take cover. Then Xavier was at the door, bursting inside with his hat gone and his coat showing a bloody tear at the sleeve. "I told you to ride for White Oaks," he said between heavy breaths. "You're welcome," Amelia replied, reloading the rifle. "Besides, I don't take orders from Texas Rangers in New Mexico territory." A brief smile flashed across Xavier's face despite the danger. "Stubborn woman, you hit one of them, at least winged him, but there are still 3 out there, including Vance." Xavier checked his wound, a minor graze that had torn his shirt and left a bloody furrow along his upper arm. "We're outnumbered and they have the high ground. Not ideal." "The back window," Amelia suggested. "We could reach the horses and make a run for it while they're focused on the front." Xavier nodded. "Worth a try. You go first, I'll cover you." This time, Amelia didn't argue. She crawled to the back of the shack where a small window, little more than a shuttered opening, provided a potential escape route. She pushed it open carefully, scanning the area beyond for any sign of their attackers. "Clear," she whispered. With Xavier watching the front, she slipped through the window and dropped to the ground outside. The horses were still where they'd left them, though clearly nervous from the gunfire. She moved toward them cautiously, speaking softly to keep them calm. A bullet splintered the corner of the shack, inches from her head. One of the attackers had spotted her. Amelia dove for cover as Xavier returned fire from inside, forcing the shooter to retreat. "Go!" Xavier shouted through the window. "Get to the horses!" Amelia scrambled to her feet and ran for the animals. She untied both mounts quickly, leading them closer to the window where Xavier waited. More shots rang out as the attackers realized their quarry was escaping. Xavier fired several covering shots, then climbed through the window with surprising agility for his size. He swung into Ranger's saddle in one fluid motion, while Amelia mounted Penny. "Stay low and ride hard," Xavier instructed as they spurred their horses away from the shack, heading for the shelter of a nearby arroyo. They had barely reached the shallow ravine when riders appeared on the ridge behind them, giving chase. Xavier and Amelia pushed their mounts to a gallop, using the twisting course of the arroyo for cover as they fled. Bullets whistled overhead occasionally, but the difficult terrain and the increasing distance made accurate shooting impossible for their pursuers. After several miles of hard riding, Xavier signaled Amelia to slow down. "We've got some breathing room," he said, checking over his shoulder. "They're still coming, but they've fallen back." "Where to now?" Amelia asked, patting Penny's neck to calm the winded horse. Xavier considered their options. "White Oaks is too obvious they'd expect us to go straight to Wells, and if what we suspect about Fletcher's influence is true, the town might not be safe even with the sheriff's protection." "Lincoln," Amelia suggested. "The federal marshal has an office there." "Too far with them on our trail," Xavier shook his head. "We need somewhere closer, somewhere we can hole up until we figure out our next move." He studied the landscape, then pointed to a line of hills to the east. "The Jicarilla settlement is in those hills. Old Santiago Jimenez still lives there. He helped me track some rustlers through this country last year. He's a good man, and no friend to the mining interests." Amelia nodded her agreement, and they altered their course toward the hills, keeping to rough country where their tracks would be harder to follow. The sun was high overhead now, beating down mercilessly as they pushed on. As they rode, Amelia couldn't help glancing at Xavier's wounded arm. The bloodstain had spread, darkening his sleeve. "We should tend to that when we reach Santiago's," she said. Xavier grunted in acknowledgement but offered no complaint about the injury. His focus remained on their surroundings, alert for any sign of pursuit. The Jicarilla settlement was a small cluster of adobe buildings nestled in a protected valley between the hills. Santiago Jimenez's home stood slightly apart from the others, a well-maintained adobe with a small corral and garden. As they approached, an elderly man emerged, a shotgun held casually but ready. "Ryder," he called out, recognizing Xavier. "Trouble follows you like a shadow, eh?" "Like my own heartbeat, Santiago," Xavier replied with grim humor. "We need shelter and discretion." The old man's sharp eyes took in Amelia, Xavier's bloody sleeve, and their trail-worn appearance. He nodded once. "Come, inside." Santiago's home was cool and dim after the brightness outside. He motioned them to a rough wooden table while he secured the door. "Sit. I will bring water and food." "Then you tell me why men with guns chase you across my valley." As Santiago bustled about, preparing a simple meal of beans, tortillas, and dried meat, Amelia carefully extracted the metal box from her saddlebag. She placed it on the table between herself and Xavier. "This is why they're trying to kill us," she said quietly. "My father's evidence of corruption and murder." Xavier nodded, his expression solemn. "And now we have to decide what to do with it." Santiago returned with food and a medical kit. "Eat first," he instructed. "Then talk. And let the señorita tend your arm, Ryder. You bleed on my floor, you mop it up." Despite the tension and exhaustion, Amelia found herself smiling at the old man's gruff manner. As they ate the simple but sustaining food, she felt strength returning to her limbs and clarity to her thoughts. After the meal, she helped Xavier remove his shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had cut a furrow along his upper arm, painful but not serious. She cleaned it carefully with water and whiskey from Santiago's supplies, then bandaged it with practiced hands. "You've done this before," Xavier observed as she tied off the bandage. "Ranch life isn't always gentle," Amelia replied. "Father insisted I learn basic doctoring." "Your father was a wise man," Santiago commented, settling at the table with them. "Now, tell me why Fletcher's men hunt you." Xavier raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You know it's Fletcher," Santiago snorted. "That snake has been trying to drive us from our homes for 2 years. He claims the water, the land, everything." He spat contemptuously on the dirt floor. "When men with fine clothes and Eastern guns ride through my valley, I know who sends them." Amelia opened the metal box and spread out her father's evidence. "My father discovered that Fletcher, Judge Morris, and others conspired to invalidate the San Miguel grant. They falsified records to steal land and water rights from the Domings family and others with legitimate claims." Santiago's weathered face hardened as he examined the documents. "This is what got your father killed?" "Yes," Amelia confirmed. "He was gathering evidence to expose them. They sent the Blackwell gang to steal it and eliminate him. They killed my parents and burned our ranch," she continued, her voice steady despite the pain the words brought. "Now they're trying to silence me as well." Santiago studied her with newfound respect. "You have courage, señorita." "Like your father." He turned to Xavier. "And you, Ranger, why do you risk your life in this fight?" "Because it's the right thing to do," Xavier answered simply. "And because I've been hunting the Blackwell gang since they killed my brother. This conspiracy is bigger than I realized, but the principle remains the same: justice needs to be served." The old man nodded, satisfied with the answer. "You can stay until morning. By then, Fletcher's men will have spread out, thinking you've run far." That is when you should move when they look elsewhere. Where should we go? Amelia asked. White Oaks may not be safe, even with Sheriff Wells. Santa Fe, Xavier decided. The territorial governor needs to see this evidence. With his authority, we can bring in federal marshals to arrest Fletcher, Morris, and the others. A good plan, Santiago agreed. But the journey is long and Fletcher will have men watching the roads. We won't take the roads, Xavier said. There's an old Spanish trail through the mountains. Longer but safer. Santiago nodded approvingly. I will provide supplies and fresh horses. Mine are not so fine as yours, but they know the mountain paths. As night fell, Amelia found herself sitting outside Santiago's home, wrapped in a borrowed blanket against the evening chill. The stars emerged overhead, brilliant and countless in the clear desert air. Despite the danger they still faced, she felt a curious peace. After days of reacting to events beyond her control, she finally had purpose and direction. Xavier joined her, his tall frame settling beside her on the simple bench. You should rest, he said. Tomorrow will be challenging. I was thinking about my parents, Amelia replied softly, about what they would make of all this. They'd be proud of your courage, Xavier said with conviction. Not many would have the strength to pursue justice in the face of such danger. I'm not sure it's courage so much as stubbornness, Amelia admitted. I can't let them win, Xavier, not after what they've done. He was quiet for a moment, his face half illuminated by the light spilling from Santiago's window. There's a difference between vengeance and justice, he finally said. I learned that the hard way after my brother was killed. How? Amelia asked, genuinely curious about this man who had become so important to her in such a short time. Xavier gazed up at the stars, his expression distant. I spent the first month tracking the Blackwell gang like a man possessed. Didn't sleep, barely ate. All I could think about was making them pay. He shook his head. I cornered one of them in a saloon in Laredo, had my gun to his head. What stopped you? A Texas Ranger captain named Samuel Thornton. He'd been tracking the same man for a different crime. Made me realize that killing out of rage might satisfy my pain for a moment, but it wouldn't honor my brother's memory. Xavier's voice softened with remembrance. He offered me a badge instead of a hangman's noose, said my passion for justice could be channeled into something meaningful. And that's how you became a ranger, Amelia concluded. Xavier nodded. Thornton taught me that true justice isn't about satisfying personal vendettas, it's about upholding something larger than ourselves. The law, imperfect as it can be, is still our best chance at civilization out here. Amelia considered his words, finding wisdom in them despite the anger that still smoldered in her heart. I want them to pay for what they did to my parents, she admitted, but I want it done right. I want everyone to know what kind of men they really are. That's justice, Xavier affirmed. And that's what we're going to get, starting tomorrow. They sat in companionable silence for a time, the vast sky above them a reminder of how small human concerns could be in the grand scheme of things. Yet in that moment, Amelia felt anything but insignificant. With Xavier beside her and purpose before her, she felt equal to whatever challenges lay ahead. We should get some sleep, Xavier eventually said, rising from the bench. Dawn comes early. Amelia nodded and followed him inside, where Santiago had prepared pallets for them on opposite sides of the main room. As she settled onto the simple bed, Amelia realized how much her life had changed in just a few days. She had lost everything: home, family, security, yet somehow had found something new. A cause worth fighting for, and perhaps, in the steady presence of Xavier Ryder, someone worth fighting alongside. Sleep came more easily than she had expected, deep and dreamless. The pre-dawn light was just beginning to gray the eastern sky when Santiago roused them. He had been busy while they slept packing supplies, preparing fresh horses, even securing additional ammunition for their weapons. "My nephew Pablo will guide you through the mountains," he explained as they ate a hurried breakfast of cornmeal porridge. "He knows paths that even Fletcher's men could not find." Pablo proved to be a young man of about 20, with Santiago's sharp eyes and reserved manner. He nodded respectfully to Xavier and Amelia, but spoke little as they prepared to depart. "The journey to Santa Fe will take 3 days if all goes well," Santiago told them. "Pablo will see you safely to the territorial road north of Capitan. From there, you should encounter regular patrols." As they mounted the fresh horses, sturdy mountain ponies, with sure footing, Santiago pressed something into Amelia's hand. It was a small leather pouch containing herbs. "For luck," he said simply, "and to remember that not all of us have forgotten honor in these changing times." Amelia thanked him warmly, touched by the gesture. As they rode away from the settlement with Pablo in the lead, she found herself thinking about the complex web of alliances and conflicts that defined life in the New Mexico territory. The American legal system, the remnants of Spanish rule, the indigenous peoples all coexisting, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not, in a land both harsh and beautiful. The mountain trail was as challenging as Xavier had warned: narrow switchbacks, steep ascents, and treacherous descents that required complete concentration. Pablo led them confidently, occasionally pointing out landmarks or warning of difficult passages ahead. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they had left. In the distance, Amelia could see Ryder's tiny figures moving across the landscape below like ants on a tablecloth. "Fletcher's men?" she asked Xavier, who had paused beside her to survey the scene. "Likely," he confirmed. "But they're looking in the wrong direction. They expect us to head for Lincoln or White Oaks." Pablo, overhearing them, allowed himself a rare smile. "They will never find this trail unless they were born to it," he said with quiet pride. "My grandfather's grandfather walked these paths." They continued upward, the air growing cooler as they climbed. Pine and juniper replaced the scrub vegetation of the lower elevations, offering welcome shade against the afternoon sun. Game trails occasionally intersected their path, and once they startled a small herd of deer that bounded away with white tails flashing. It was a beautiful journey despite the urgency of their mission and the danger at their backs. Amelia found herself noticing details she might have missed under different circumstances: the way sunlight filtered through pine needles, the call of birds unfamiliar to her ranch-trained ear, the subtle changes in vegetation as they ascended. Xavier rode beside her when the trail permitted, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings but occasionally returning to her face with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't merely the vigilance of a lawman protecting a witness. There was something more personal in his gaze, something that sent a flutter of awareness through her despite the inappropriate timing. They made camp that evening in a small protected hollow beside a spring, a location Pablo assured them was known only to his family. As they prepared a cold supper, Pablo had advised against a fire. Amelia found herself watching Xavier as he tended the horses. There was an efficient grace to his movements, a quiet competence that spoke of years spent relying on his own abilities for survival. In the fading light, with his hat pushed back on his head and his expression unguarded, he looked younger somehow, less the hardened ranger and more the man beneath the badge. When he caught her watching him, Amelia didn't look away. Something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed through shared danger and purpose. It wasn't merely gratitude or respect anymore. It was something deeper, something with the potential to grow into more if given the chance. Pablo, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the charged moment, announced that he would take first watch. Xavier nodded his agreement, then spread his bedroll near Amelia's close enough for protection, but with a respectful distance maintained. "We should reach the territorial road by tomorrow afternoon," he said as they settled for the night. "From there, it's a day's ride to Santa Fe if we push hard." "And then what?" Amelia asked. "Will the governor listen to us?" "Governor Wallace is a man of principle," Xavier assured her. "He's been working to bring order to the territory since he took office. Corruption like Fletcher's is exactly what he's trying to eliminate." "And the Blackwell gang, will they be brought to justice as well?" Xavier's expression hardened. "That's my personal mission. With the evidence we have, we can connect them directly to Fletcher and Morris. That makes them not just outlaws but conspirators in corruption. The territorial authorities will have every reason to commit resources to hunting them down." Amelia studied his face in the dim starlight. "And after?" "When it's over," he seemed surprised by the question. "I haven't thought much beyond seeing this through," he admitted. "Return to Texas, I suppose. There's always work for a ranger." The answer brought an unexpected pang of disappointment. Amelia hadn't allowed herself to consider what would happen after their mission was completed. The idea of Xavier simply riding away, returning to his life while she rebuilt hers, left an emptiness she wasn't prepared for. "What about you?" Xavier asked, turning the question back to her. "Will you rebuild the ranch?" "I don't know," Amelia answered honestly. "It would be starting from nothing, and it would be—" She hesitated. "Lonely." The word hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Xavier's expression softened, and for a moment, Amelia thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he simply nodded. "Get some rest," he said gently. "We have a long day ahead." Sleep was elusive that night, and not just because of the hard ground beneath her bedroll. Amelia's mind was filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions: grief for her parents, determination to see justice done, and increasingly, a yearning for something she wasn't sure she could have. Morning came too quickly, gray light filtering through the trees as Pablo roused them from their brief rest. They ate a hurried breakfast of jerky and hardtack, then resumed their journey through the mountains. The trail grew more difficult as they continued, requiring them to dismount and lead the horses through particularly treacherous sections. By midday, however, the path began to descend, and eventually they emerged from the forest onto a ridge overlooking a broad valley. "The territorial road," Pablo said, pointing to a ribbon of lighter earth cutting through the landscape below. "You will be safe from there to Santa Fe." "You're not coming with us?" Amelia asked, surprised. Pablo shook his head. "My place is with my people. And my uncle will need to know you are safely through the mountains." Xavier extended his hand to the young guide. "Thank you, Pablo. Your help has been invaluable." The young man accepted the handshake with dignity. "It is good to fight against men like Fletcher. They think because they have money and power, they can take what is not theirs." His gaze shifted to Amelia. "Your father was respected among our people, señorita. He dealt fairly, even when others did not." "Thank you," Amelia said, touched by the tribute. "That means a great deal to me." With a final nod, Pablo turned his horse and began the journey back the way they had come, soon disappearing among the trees. Xavier and Amelia continued downward, following a game trail that eventually joined a more established path leading to the valley floor. They reached the territorial road by mid-afternoon. It was well traveled, with fresh tracks indicating regular traffic. Xavier seemed to relax slightly once they were on the road, though his vigilance never entirely disappeared. "We should reach Capitan by nightfall," he said. "We can find proper lodging there, get a hot meal and some rest before the final push to Santa Fe tomorrow." The prospect of a real bed and hot food was appealing, but Amelia found herself strangely reluctant to return to civilization. The past few days, for all their danger and hardship, had created a private world where she and Xavier existed apart from ordinary concerns. Once they reached Santa Fe and delivered the evidence, that world would end. They rode steadily through the afternoon, occasionally passing wagons or other riders. No one paid them particular attention, just another couple traveling the territory on business of their own. As the sun began to set, the scattered buildings of Capitan appeared on the horizon. Compared to White Oaks, Capitan was a modest settlement, a few businesses along the main street, a small church, scattered homes. It lacked the frenetic energy of a mining boomtown, which made it perfect for their purposes. They were less likely to encounter anyone connected to Fletcher or his allies here. They stopped at the town's only hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with a small dining room on the ground floor. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman named Mrs. Garrett, seemed delighted to have customers. "We don't get many travelers this time of year," she explained as she showed them to adjoining rooms on the upper floor. "Supper's at 6 if you're interested. Nothing fancy, but it's hot and plentiful." The simple room with its clean bed and washstand seemed luxurious to Amelia after days of rough travel. She took advantage of the hot water Mrs. Garrett provided to wash away the dust of the trail, then changed into the cleanest of the clothes Santiago had provided. When she descended to the dining room, she found Xavier already seated at a table near the back, positioned to view both the main entrance and the stairs. He rose as she approached, his eyes warming with appreciation. "You look rested," he said as he held her chair. "Amazing what hot water can accomplish," Amelia replied with a smile. "How's your arm?" "Healing well," he assured her. "I've had worse." Mrs. Garrett served them a simple but satisfying meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and greens with apple cobbler for dessert. As they ate, Xavier outlined their plans for the final leg of their journey. "We'll start at first light," he said. "It's a full day's ride to Santa Fe, but the road is good and we should make good time if the weather holds." He glanced out the window where darkness had fallen. "Once we reach the governor's mansion, we'll need to be persuasive. Wallace is a good man, but he's cautious by nature. He'll want to be certain before moving against men as powerful as Fletcher and Morris." "The evidence speaks for itself," Amelia pointed out. "My father's documentation is thorough." "True, but powerful men have powerful friends," Xavier cautioned. "We'll need to be prepared for resistance, even at the highest levels." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another guest, a well-dressed man who entered the dining room and surveyed it briefly before taking a table across the room. There was nothing overtly suspicious about him, yet Xavier tensed almost imperceptibly. "Problem?" Amelia asked quietly. "Not sure," Xavier murmured. "He's wearing city clothes but has the stance of someone comfortable with a gun. Could be nothing, but let's not linger." They finished their meal quickly after that, declining Mrs. Garrett's offer of coffee. As they rose to return to their rooms, the stranger's gaze followed them with subtle but unmistakable interest. In the hallway outside their adjoining rooms, Xavier paused. "Lock your door and window," he instructed in a low voice. "Keep the derringer close. If you hear anything unusual, anything at all, knock on the connecting door immediately." "You think that man is one of Fletcher's?" Amelia asked, glancing toward the stairs. "I think we can't be too careful," Xavier replied. "Santa Fe is within reach. We can't afford mistakes now." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Sleep well, Amelia. Tomorrow we finish this." The unexpected tenderness of the gesture left Amelia momentarily speechless. She nodded, then retreated into her room, her skin tingling where his fingers had brushed it. True to Xavier's instructions, she secured the door and window, then placed the Derringer on the nightstand within easy reach. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Her mind kept returning to the journey ahead and to the man in the next room. In just a few days, Xavier Ryder had become central to her existence in a way she couldn't have imagined. It wasn't merely gratitude for his protection or admiration for his principles, though both were certainly present. There was something more, a connection that transcended their shared mission, a sense that, in him, she had found someone who understood her completely. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. After losing everything, the prospect of forming such a profound attachment seemed dangerous. What if she lost him too? Yet the alternative, keeping her distance, protecting her heart, seemed equally impossible. A soft knock at the connecting door interrupted her thoughts. She sat up, reaching for the Derringer before calling out softly, "Xavier." "It's me," his voice confirmed. "May I come in? There's something you should know." Amelia rose quickly, pulling a shawl around her nightdress before unlocking the connecting door. Xavier entered, still fully dressed, his expression grave. "What is it?" she asked, alarmed by his demeanor. "I just overheard our fellow guest speaking with someone downstairs," Xavier explained. "He mentioned White Oaks and asked specifically about travelers heading to Santa Fe." "Fletcher's man," Amelia concluded, her heart sinking. "Almost certainly," Xavier agreed. "We need to leave now before he can send word or bring in reinforcements." In the middle of the night, Amelia was already moving to gather her few belongings, practical concerns overriding her apprehension. "It's our best chance. They won't expect it." Xavier returned briefly to his own room, emerging with his saddlebags and weapons. "I'll go down and settle our bill with Mrs. Garrett. Meet me at the back stairs in 5 minutes. Dress warmly, it'll be cold riding at night." Amelia changed quickly into her traveling clothes, grateful for the warm layers Santiago had provided. She packed her meager possessions, making sure the metal box with her father's evidence was secure in her saddlebag. When she met Xavier at the back stairs, he looked grim but determined. "Mrs. Garrett says our friend asked specifically about a couple matching our description. We need to move fast." They slipped out through the kitchen and made their way to the stables where their horses were housed. Working quickly and quietly, they saddled the animals and led them into the alley behind the hotel. "If we head directly north on the territorial road, we'll be too exposed," Xavier said as they mounted. "We'll take side trails for the first few miles, then cut back to the main road when we've put some distance between us and Capitan." They rode out of town at a walk to avoid drawing attention, but once clear of the last buildings, Xavier set a brisk pace. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead with enough light to navigate the trail. "How did they find us?" Amelia wondered as they rode side by side. "We were so careful. Fletcher has money and influence," Xavier reminded her. "He could have men watching every settlement between White Oaks and Santa Fe. All it would take is one telegram to alert them." The realization that their enemy's reach extended so far was sobering. Amelia found herself scanning the darkness around them constantly, imagining pursuers behind every shadow. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. Dawn found them miles from Capitan, approaching a crossroads where their trail rejoined the territorial road. Xavier called a halt in a small grove of trees to consult the rough map Santiago had provided. "We're making good time," he said, pointing to their position on the map. "If we push hard, we can reach Santa Fe by nightfall. You think they're following us?" Amelia asked, rubbing her arms against the morning chill. Xavier's expression was guarded. "I think we have to assume they are. Fletcher has too much at stake to let us reach the governor." As if to confirm his words, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them, multiple riders approaching from the south, moving fast. "Time to go," Xavier said tersely, refolding the map and mounting Ranger in one fluid motion. They spurred their horses onto the territorial road, pushing them to a gallop. The well-maintained route allowed for faster travel than the mountain trails, but it also left them more exposed. Xavier led them in a punishing pace, stopping only when necessary to rest the animals. By midday, the terrain was changing, becoming more mountainous as they approached Santa Fe. The road wound through passes and valleys, occasionally offering views back the way they had come. During one such moment, Xavier reined in sharply. "Riders," he said grimly, pointing to distant figures on the road behind them. "At least 4, maybe more." "How far to Santa Fe?" Amelia asked, her throat dry with apprehension. "Too far to outrun them," Xavier admitted. "They're gaining and our horses are tiring." He surveyed their surroundings with a tactician's eye. "We need to find defensible ground, make a stand until help arrives." "Help? Who would help us out here?" "The territorial road has regular patrols," Xavier explained. "This close to Santa Fe, we might encounter one if we can hold out long enough." He pointed to a rocky outcropping above the road. "There. High ground, good cover, clear lines of sight. It's our best option." They left the road, guiding their tired mounts up a steep trail to the outcropping Xavier had identified. It was a natural fortress of sorts, a jumble of boulders overlooking the road, with the mountain at their backs preventing approach from behind. Once they reached the position, Xavier helped Amelia dismount, then led the horses to a sheltered spot where they would be protected from gunfire. He worked quickly and methodically, unloading their weapons and ammunition, positioning himself where he could observe the road below. "They'll be here soon," he said, handing Amelia the Winchester. "Find cover behind that boulder. Don't expose yourself unnecessarily." "I won't cower while you face them alone," Amelia objected, checking the rifle with practiced hands. Xavier looked as if he might argue, then nodded in acceptance of her resolve. "Just be careful. They want us both dead, but they'll target me first as the greater threat." The pursuing riders appeared shortly thereafter, approaching cautiously when they realized their quarry had left the road. Amelia counted 5 men, all heavily armed. She recognized Harold Vance among them, his silver snake bolo tie glinting in the sunlight. "That's far enough," Xavier called out when the riders were within earshot, but still beyond effective rifle range. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." Vance laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Oh, I think it does, Ranger. You've been a thorn in our side long enough." "We have the evidence, Vance," Xavier replied. "Documentation of your conspiracy with Fletcher and Morris. Killing us won't change that." "Maybe not," Vance admitted, "but it'll sure make me feel better." He turned to his companions. "Spread out, don't give them clear shots." The men dismounted and began working their way up toward the outcropping, using the terrain for cover. Xavier fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt near Vance's feet, temporarily halting their advance. "Last chance, Vance," Xavier called. "Surrender now, and I'll ensure you get a fair trial." The only response was a barrage of gunfire as the men opened fire from their positions. Bullets whined off the rocks around Xavier and Amelia, forcing them to duck behind cover. The battle that followed was a tense waiting game. Vance and his men were reluctant to rush the well-defended position, preferring to wear down their opponents with sporadic fire while working to flank them. Xavier was equally patient, conserving ammunition and taking shots only when he had a clear target. Amelia followed his lead, keeping her head down and watching for any attempt to circle around their position. The hours stretched on, the afternoon sun beating down on the rocky terrain, intensifying the thirst and fatigue that plagued both sides. During a lull in the firing, Xavier crawled to Amelia's position, his face streaked with dust and sweat. "They're trying to wait us out," he said, offering her his canteen. "They know we have limited ammunition and water." Amelia took a careful sip, aware of how precious water had become. "How long can we hold them off?" "Long enough, I hope," Xavier replied, his gaze shifting to the road below. "A patrol should come through eventually, or a mail coach, anyone who could ride for help." As if in answer to their hopes, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them not from the direction of Capitan, but from the north, from Santa Fe. Xavier's expression brightened momentarily, then turned cautious. "Could be reinforcements for Vance," he warned. "Let's not show ourselves until we know for sure." They watched as a group of riders appeared on the road, uniformed men riding in formation, led by a figure Amelia recognized with a surge of relief. "Sheriff Wells," she exclaimed. Xavier nodded, a smile breaking through his grim demeanor. "And what looks like territorial officers with him." "Vance's men are about to find themselves outgunned." Below, Vance and his companions had also noticed the approaching riders. They fired a few final shots toward the outcropping, then began a hasty retreat toward their horses. "They're running," Amelia said, starting to rise. Xavier pulled her back down. "Stay covered. It could be a trick." But it was no trick. Sheriff Wells and his companions, 6 territorial officers in full uniform, had spotted the retreating men and were giving chase. Vance and one of his men managed to reach their horses and escape, but the other 3 were quickly surrounded and disarmed. Only when the situation was clearly under control did Xavier stand, waving to attract Wells's attention. The sheriff looked up, relief evident even at a distance when he spotted them. "How did Wells know where to find us?" Amelia asked as they gathered their belongings and prepared to descend. "He didn't say he was coming to White Oaks for my writ by accident," Xavier explained with a tired smile. "The man's smarter than I gave him credit for. He must have followed our trail when we didn't return as expected." They led their horses carefully down to the road, where Wells and 2 of the officers were waiting, the other 4 having continued in pursuit of Vance and the escaped man. "Ranger Ryder, Miss Sinclair," Wells called as they approached. "I was beginning to think we'd never catch up to you." "Sheriff," Xavier acknowledged, extending his hand. "Your timing is impeccable." Wells shook the offered hand firmly. "When you didn't return to White Oaks, I got worried. Then I heard about Fletcher's men asking questions in every settlement between White Oaks and Santa Fe. Figured you 2 were in trouble. So you came after us," Amelia said, touched by the sheriff's loyalty. "Not alone," Wells clarified. "I went to Lincoln first, showed your evidence to the federal marshal there. He sent word to Governor Wallace, who dispatched these fine officers to meet us." He gestured to the uniformed men. "The governor's waiting for you in Santa Fe. He's particularly interested in Judge Morris's involvement." "What about Fletcher?" Xavier asked. "Has he been apprehended?" Wells's expression darkened. "Disappeared the night after you left White Oaks, but with Morris singing like a canary to save his own hide, it's just a matter of time before we track him down." "And the Blackwell gang?" Amelia pressed. "There's a bounty on each of their heads now," Wells assured her. "Every lawman in the territory is looking for them. They won't get far." With the immediate danger past, they mounted up once more for the final leg of their journey to Santa Fe. Amelia found herself riding beside Xavier, their horses moving at a comfortable walk after the day's exertions. "It's really over, isn't it?" she said softly, still hardly able to believe it. "The worst of it," Xavier confirmed. "There will be trials, testimony. Justice takes time, but it will come." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "Your parents would be proud of what you've accomplished." "What we've accomplished," Amelia corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Xavier." Their eyes met, and in that moment, the connection between them seemed to deepen, transcending the shared danger and purpose that had brought them together. Something new was taking root, something with the potential for a future beyond justice and vengeance. "What will you do now?" Xavier asked, the question carrying more weight than its simple words suggested. Amelia considered this, realizing she hadn't thought beyond their immediate mission. "I don't know," she admitted. "The ranch is gone. I could rebuild, I suppose, but—" "But," Xavier prompted when she fell silent. "But I'm not sure that's what I want anymore," Amelia finished. "Everything's changed. I've changed." Xavier nodded in understanding. Loss has a way of reshaping our paths. Sometimes it leads us to places we never expected to go, like becoming a Texas Ranger. Amelia suggested with a small smile. "Exactly like that," Xavier agreed, returning her smile. "Sometimes the new path turns out to be the right one all along." They rode in companionable silence for a time, each lost in their own thoughts. The road to Santa Fe stretched before them, winding through the beautiful and harsh landscape of the New Mexico territory. Beyond it lay uncertainty, but also possibility. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Amelia glanced at Xavier riding beside her, steady, dependable, his presence a comfort she had come to rely on. The thought of saying goodbye when this was over brought an unexpected ache to her heart. Perhaps sensing her gaze, Xavier turned to her. "Something on your mind?" "I was just thinking," Amelia said carefully, "about what happens after Santa Fe. You'll return to Texas, I suppose." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "That was the plan," he finally said. "But plans can change." "Can they?" Amelia asked, her heart beating faster at the implication. Xavier's gaze met hers, direct and unwavering. "For the right reasons, yes." Before he could elaborate, Wells called out from ahead, pointing to the horizon where the lights of Santa Fe were just becoming visible in the gathering dusk. The moment passed, but the promise in Xavier's words lingered, giving Amelia hope that perhaps the end of their mission wouldn't mean the end of their connection. Santa Fe welcomed them with the warm glow of lamplight from adobe buildings and the sounds of a city preparing for evening. Despite the late hour, they were escorted directly to the governor's residence, a grand structure that combined Spanish colonial elegance with territorial practicality. Governor Lew Wallace, a distinguished man with a scholarly demeanor that belied his military background, received them in his study. His interest was immediate and genuine as Amelia presented her father's evidence and recounted the events that had led them to his door. "This corruption strikes at the very heart of territorial governance," Wallace declared after examining the documents. "Rest assured, Miss Sinclair, that those responsible will face the full force of the law." The governor's promise brought a sense of closure that Amelia hadn't expected to feel so soon. Justice for her parents was within reach, not complete, perhaps, until the Blackwell gang was brought to account, but substantive enough to begin healing the wound of their loss. After their audience with the governor, they were provided accommodations in guest rooms within the governor's compound. The luxury of safety, of knowing they no longer needed to look over their shoulders, was almost disorienting after days of constant vigilance. Amelia found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She stood at the window of her room, gazing out at the peaceful streets of Santa Fe, her mind turning over the events that had brought her here and wondering what would come next. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Xavier standing there, his tall frame silhouetted against the corridor's dim light. "I couldn't sleep," he explained. "Thought you might be awake as well." "Too much on my mind," Amelia admitted, stepping back to allow him entry. Xavier moved to the window where she had been standing, his gaze taking in the same view that had occupied her thoughts. "Strange how peaceful it looks," he commented. "Hard to believe that just hours ago we were fighting for our lives." "Everything seems distant now," Amelia agreed, joining him at the window. "Like it happened to someone else." "That feeling will pass," Xavier assured her. "In time, you'll reconcile who you were before with who you've become through all this." His insight reminded Amelia of how much he had already traveled the path. She was just beginning the journey from victim to survivor, from grief to purpose. "Is that what happened to you? After your brother?" Xavier nodded, his expression reflective. "Eventually. The pain never entirely disappears, but it becomes manageable, especially when you find something or someone worth building a future around." The way he looked at her as he spoke made Amelia's heart quicken. There was an openness in his expression that she hadn't seen before, as if now that their mission was accomplished, he felt free to reveal more of himself. "Earlier," Amelia said carefully, "when we were riding to Santa Fe, you said plans can change for the right reasons. What did you mean?" Xavier turned to face her fully, his gray eyes serious. "I meant that the path I thought I was on has shifted. Tracking the Blackwell gang led me to White Oaks, to your ranch, to you. And now I find myself reluctant to return to my old life, as if nothing has changed." "What has changed?" Amelia asked, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning correctly. "Everything," Xavier said simply. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "Amelia, I came to New Mexico seeking justice for my brother. I never expected to find someone who would make me think beyond vengeance, beyond the next mission. Someone who would make me consider a future I'd given up hoping for." Amelia's breath caught at his words. "What kind of future?" "One we could build together," Xavier said, his voice low and earnest. "If that's something you might want." The directness of his proposition was so characteristic of the man, straightforward, honest, without artifice. Amelia found herself responding in kind. "I've lost everything I thought defined me," she said. "My home, my parents, my place in the world. But in the midst of that loss, I found something unexpected, a connection I wasn't looking for but now can't imagine being without." Xavier's expression softened, hope dawning in his eyes. "Is that a yes?" "It's a beginning," Amelia replied, squeezing his hand. "I don't know what our future looks like any more than you do, but I want to discover it together." The smile that spread across Xavier's face transformed him, erasing the lines of worry and vigilance that had marked his features since they met. He drew her gently closer, giving her every opportunity to pull away if she wished. But Amelia had no desire to retreat. Instead, she moved toward him, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as the feelings they had kept in check during their dangerous journey finally found expression. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you standing in that green dress at Fletcher's mansion," he admitted with a rueful smile. "Even though we were surrounded by conspirators and murderers," Amelia teased. "Especially then," Xavier replied. "You were so brave, so composed. I knew then that what I felt for you went beyond admiration or the desire to protect." They talked long into the night, sharing thoughts and hopes, beginning to sketch the outlines of the future they might build together. By the time Xavier reluctantly returned to his own room, they had made plans to speak with Governor Wallace about opportunities in the territory, perhaps land near the San Miguel Grant, where they could establish a new ranch. "We'll build something better than what was lost," Xavier promised as he bid her good night. "Something that honors your parents' memory while creating our own legacy." "I believe you," Amelia said, and realized she truly did. The man who had promised to give her back more than she had lost was already making good on his word. The trials that followed over the next several months brought justice to White Oaks. Judge Morris confessed to his role in the conspiracy, implicating Fletcher and several other prominent citizens. Fletcher himself was captured trying to cross into Mexico and returned to stand trial. The evidence James Sinclair had gathered, combined with Amelia's testimony, resulted in convictions for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder. The Blackwell gang proved more elusive, but Xavier's knowledge of their methods and Amelia's ability to identify them led to several captures. By the time winter settled over the territory, only 2 members remained at large, and posses were closing in on their location. With Governor Wallace's assistance, Amelia and Xavier secured land adjacent to the San Miguel Grant fertile acres with access to Baxter Creek, perfect for the cattle operation they envisioned. They were married in Santa Fe that December, with Sheriff Wells and Santiago Jimenez among their guests. The following spring found them breaking ground for their new ranch house. As they worked side by side, Xavier paused, wiping sweat from his brow as he gazed across the land that was becoming their home. "Your father would approve, I think," he said, watching Amelia mark the dimensions for what would become their garden. "He would," Amelia agreed, straightening to survey their progress. The foundation was taking shape, sturdy stone that would support walls of adobe and timber. "He always said that the land endures, even when people come and go. That's why he fought so hard to protect it." Xavier nodded, understanding the legacy they were continuing. "We'll honor that fight, make sure this land stays in good hands." As if to emphasize his words, he placed a hand gently on her stomach, where the first subtle signs of pregnancy were just becoming visible. Their child would be born in the fall, into a home built with their own hands on land secured through justice. "They took everything," Amelia said softly, placing her hand over his. "But you gave me back more than I lost, a future, a family, hope." Xavier drew her close, his arms strong and steady around her. "We built it together," he corrected gently, "and we'll keep building day by day." As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the land in gold and shadow, Amelia leaned into her husband's embrace, content in the knowledge that, from the ashes of loss, they had forged something precious and enduring a love as vast and promising as the New Mexico sky above them. 5 years later, the Ryder Ranch had become a thriving operation, known throughout the territory for its fine cattle and fair business practices. The house, once just a foundation and a dream, now stood proudly on the rise overlooking Baxter Creek, a spacious adobe home filled with laughter and life. Amelia stood on the porch, watching Xavier teach their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. The boy sat straight and proud in the small saddle, his face a perfect blend of his parents' features, his eyes alight with excitement as his father led the gentle animal around the corral. Beside Amelia, cradled in her arms, their 6-month-old daughter, Sarah, gurgled happily, reaching for the sunlight that dappled the porch through the trellis of climbing roses. The Sinclair Ryder legacy continued, rooted in the land they had fought to protect. And though the grief of loss never entirely faded, It had been transformed into something beautiful, a family built on love, courage, and the promise kept by a cowboy who gave back more than was taken.